If you love me, please don't judge me. Got my hands tied, the power's above me. Don't shoot the messenger, I'm just a puppet here. If you wanna place blame, then look to the puppeteer. Family, fortune, envy, jealousy, privilege, passed on, legacy, secret, sabotage, borderline, felony, suicide, subtract, selfish, pedigree, yeah.
How's it going, everybody? It's C-RadTV back here with another video. So, of course, it's now time to go to the third part of the What If NASCAR had the F1 point system of the My What If series. So, the last time in the What If series, we learned that there were a few differences. We had a few different title changes. We had a couple close championship battles, but none of them went down to the final race of the season. And a little history was rewritten. And in this episode, we're going to continue on in this series, and we're going to go right into the 1970s, aka the start of NASCAR's modern era, where in 1972 the schedule got condensed down to around 30 races or so instead of the 40 or 50 or even 60 races that they were running in the 60s and shit. So pretty much the schedule got condensed down to what we have today, kind of. So how many close championship battles will we have, and how much history will we have here? Well, let's go ahead and let's find out what happened in the 1970s. So, of course, I'll show on screen the points format that was used in the 1970s on the screen there, where it's still the top 6 get points. And before we get into it, let me just stress out that once again, this is just a hypothetical scenario. I know everyone would have raced differently had this format been in play. This is just for fun. So now, with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and let's jump into what would happen in the 1970s if NASCAR had F1 points. So 1970, the class of the field was it was a championship battle between Richard Petty and Bobby Isaac, with Richard Petty having 18 wins to Bobby Isaac's 11 wins. Bobby Allison would try and make it a 3-man battle, but in the end, Bobby Allison just didn't have the consistency or the speed to keep up with both Bobby Isaac and Richard Petty that year. It would be a championship battle that would go down to the wire, but the difference was that Richard Petty was able to lock the championship up officially with 1 race to go in the season. So Richard Petty would end up winning the championship in 1970 over Bobby Isaac. And under this format, this would be Richard Petty's 3rd Cup championship. So for 1971, this was even no contest. Richard Petty was just flat out dominant that year. He won 21 races. So it was pretty similar to his 1967 championship run, but without 27 wins and without winning 10 races in a row. Like, I believe the most races he won in a row at one point was 4 or 5 at one point or something like that. Like, Richard Petty was just easily dominant. And yeah, Richard Petty, he would end up cruising to his 4th career championship, and for the first time in his career, he would win back-to-back titles. So even under this format, Richard Petty would still become the first driver to win 4 championships in NASCAR Cup history. So 1972, we would have a close championship battle between Bobby Allison and Richard Petty. Both drivers combined to win 18 of the 30 races, with Richard Petty winning 8 and Bobby Allison winning 10. It was a back-and-forth battle, but in the end, Bobby Allison would lock up the championship and beat Petty for the 1972 title, locking up the title with a race to go in the season. So under this format, Bobby Allison would win a championship, but that championship would come 11 years sooner than it did in real life. So throughout much of 1973, this was looking like a championship battle between Richard Petty and Cale Yarborough. Both drivers were dead even with each other. And this would have went down to the final race between these two. However, there was one thing they didn't count on. They didn't count on David Pearson, who was very consistent in this season, despite missing a third of the year because of the Wood brothers choosing to only run part-time throughout much of their existence. So even then, this championship would go down to the final race between David Pearson and Richard Petty. And David Pearson, Richard Petty would have a DNF in the finale. David Pearson would win the season finale. And David Pearson, despite missing a third of the year, would still win the championship. So this would be the equivalent of Kyle Busch's 2015 championship run. The only difference is this doesn't come under a bullshit chase format. And the one thing we can say to Richard Petty and Cale Yarborough is, hey, you had all season, especially those 10 races David Pearson didn't compete in, to build a big enough gap to stay ahead of him. And they failed to capitalize on that. And even in 1973, David Pearson was no slouch. In those 18, he only ran 18 to 28 races, but in those 18 races, he had 11 wins and 14 top fives. So he was no slouch. He proved he was more than worthy of the championship, even in this format. So yeah, despite missing the third year, David Pearson would still win his fourth championship under this format. And this would be the Wood brothers' first championship. So under this format, the Wood brothers would win a championship, and they would not have a 70-year legacy of failure like they do today. So 1974, the championship battle was between Richard Petty and Cale Yarborough, so we would get the championship battle again. This time, David Pearson would not interfere, as both Richard and Cale would learn from their mistakes from 1973, and they would take advantage of the races David Pearson missed to build a big enough gap to keep Pearson out of it. So Pearson was a non-factor in this title battle. So it was between Richard Petty and Cale Yarborough. Both were pretty neck and neck all year, but in the end, Richard Petty's consistency could not be matched by Cale Yarborough, and Richard Petty would end up pulling away at the end of the year, and Richard Petty would win his 5th championship with around 2 races to go in the season. So, under this format, Richard Petty would still be the first to win 5 championships. So, 1975, it was a complete dominant season by Richard Petty. Richard Petty would win 13 of the 30 races in 1975. He was just the class of the field all year. It was no contest. No one could match Richard Petty's speed or his consistency. And Richard Petty would end up cruising to his 6th championship in 1975. So even under this format, Richard Petty would win his 6th championship. He would still be the first driver to win 6 titles under this format. And Richard Petty would also still be the first driver to win back-to-back championships on 2 different occasions, since this would be the 2nd time that Petty's won back-to-back titles. So 1976, we had a championship battle between Cale Yarborough and David Pearson. Now, Richard Petty, he tried to be in this championship battle too, but he just started to falter off on consistency the second half of the season. So it became a 2-man battle for the championship, with David Pearson still hanging in there despite missing only 8 races because of Wood brothers choosing to run part-time. But those 8 races he would end up missing, those races would come back to bite David Pearson in the ass, as Cale Yarborough once again learned from what happened in 1973, and Cale Yarborough would take advantage of those 8 races and build a big enough gap to stay ahead of David Pearson, as Cale Yarborough would lock the championship up with like 3 or 4 races left to go in the season. Now, David Pearson would have a solid finish to end the year. He would get some solid points to end the season. But all that solid finish to the end of the season it just made the championship look a lot closer than it actually was. So 1977, the season was all about Cale Yarborough. He was just a class of the field all year in terms of speed and consistency. He was always up front, always finishing well. Richard Petty tried to keep up with him the best he could, but Richard Petty's consistency fell off in the second half of the year and just couldn't dug himself into a hole he couldn't get out of. And Cale Yarborough would pull away the second half of the year. And Cale Yarborough would end up winning his second championship and would go back-to-back. So Cale Yarborough still would win back-to-back titles at least. And this would be his second championship. So 1978, once again, Cale Yarborough was the class of the field. In terms of speed and consistency, it's just wash, rinse, repeat from 1977. Only difference is, instead of Richard Petty, it was Darrell Waltrip that just fell off the second half of the year and just could not match Cale Yarborough in speed and consistency. Where Darrell Waltrip was pretty hit or miss in 1978. But Cale Yarborough would end up pulling away the second half of the year, and Cale Yarborough would cruise on to his third championship. So under this format, Cale Yarborough would win at least 3 titles, and under this format, Cale Yarborough would still become the first driver in Cup history to win 3 straight championships. So Cale Yarborough's 3 straight championship streak remains unchanged. That still remains the same. So in 1979, we would have a 3-man battle for the championship between Richard Petty, Bobby Allison, and Darrell Waltrip. Of course, we had the season start off with, of course, 1979 Daytona 500 with the famous fight between Cale Yarborough and Donnie and Bobby Allison. Pretty much the race that put NASCAR on the map. So anyway, back to the 3-man championship. Both 3 were pretty equal all year. All 3 had an equal amount of consistency, but in the end, Richard Petty would end up pulling away from Darrell and Bobby, and Richard Petty would lock up his 7th championship with a race to go in the season. So even under this format, Richard Petty would still be the first driver to win 7 championships, and he would still win at least 7 titles under this format. So anyway, that's going to wrap it up here for this What If video. So, really, in this format, not a whole lot really changes. Like, Richard Petty would still win 7 championships. Cale Yarborough would still win 3 straight championships. The only difference is that the only titles that would change in this format would be 1970, 1972, and 1973. Also, Bobby Allison would win his first championship 11 years sooner than he did in real life. David Pearson would also end up becoming a 4-time champion. And the Wood Brothers would actually have a championship on their team name, instead of having a 70-plus year legacy of failure that's still going alive and well today. I think it's kind of sad that the Wood Brothers have never won a championship in their entire history, to be honest. I thought they would have had at least 1 or 2 for sure. But sad that they didn't. But yeah, and we had 1 championship battle go down to the final race of the season, which saw the equivalent of Kyle Busch 2015 happen, except this time it's not under a bullshit chase grid format. So yeah, a couple things changed, but some things stayed the same. So yeah, anyway, that's going to wrap it up here for this. So, only 1 championship battle, like I mentioned, went down to the final race. So far, in terms of the championship battles in this series that have gone down to the final race, that puts us now at 4 championship battles that went down to the season finale. So yeah, like I said, I think it's going to be very rare we see a championship battle goes down to the finale, but it will produce some great moments and some great battles for sure. And yeah, the battle in 1973, that would be the first time in 19 seasons that the championship goes down to the final race. But anyway, that's going to wrap it up here for this series, for this part. The next part of this series, whenever I get to it and how fast I get the research done and all that, it will take place on the 1980s. Which would be the start of NASCAR's growth. And from what I know in the 1980s, there were a lot of close championship battles in the 80s. So maybe we'll see some close championship battles under this format in the 80s. We'll have to see in the next part. But anyway, that's all I gotta say. Hope everyone's a great day. I'll see you all in the next video I do. Peace.